Yeah. Okay, I think we can give it 30 seconds. Yeah. Sanibonani Makai. I should probably stick to what I know. All right. It is 2:32. I think we can start. Thumbs up from my colleagues and co-presenters if we're ready. Good afternoon, everyone. Sanibonani. I hope everyone is doing well. We know it's the afternoon, but thank you so much for taking this time out to spend it with us. It's cold, it's winter, everyone wants to be under the blankets and keeping warm and all. But yeah, so today we wanted to have a webinar with ESGM and our partners in Eswatini and the communities to address something that has been going on, particularly hate speech, hate crimes. And we've seen that happen across the region. And across the world, actually, from the results of Project 2025 to anti-hate to anti-rights and anti-gender groups forming and convening across the continent, getting together to discuss how they're going to put in hate legislation in our countries. And we thought, as communities, how do we address that? What remedies are in place? What mechanisms can we use as communities, as NGOs to thoroughly respond and address hate crimes and hate speeches in our different countries? This webinar will particularly focus on Eswatini, and we'll look into legal strategies that we can use, looking into our local laws and what international mechanisms are there also. But we're not doing this alone. We're co-convening with ESGM. And I will just briefly give it to our colleagues at ESGM, Sam and Banere, to just quickly say hi. And they'll also introduce their speakers shortly from UNDP, from Transwati, the Human Rights Commission, and VOOF. Yeah. Over to you, ESGM. Sure, my co-host is here. Do we have Banele or Sam? Oh, my Pezu.
Hi everyone. Sorry, we are having network problems. We are going to be joined by our colleague Bendulo from UNDP, and from the Human Rights Commission, the Executive Secretary and the Human Rights Examiner have promised to also join in the call.
Thank
And
you,
lastly, we have Model C from Transwati.
great. That's always nice. It's always good to have voices from
Hello.
communities
Hi,
in the room.
Bradley.
Hi. Hi,
Um,
Model C.
I'm in public transport, but I can introduce myself for now. I think you hear the background, the noise from the background.
Yes, yes.
Oh, yes, okay, please. Okay, hi, colleagues. Model C from Transwati, trans woman, my pronouns are she, her, and hers. And also, I would like to say thank you so much from ESGM and SALC for making sure that we also voice out some of the effects of hate speech, because there's a lot that has happened and there are a lot of effects which are affecting the trans community. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Model C. And we'll hear more from you also during the course of this webinar. But right now, I'll just quickly bring Aneke in, Salk ED, to just, yeah, let us know what strategies are there, legal strategies are there in the Eswatini context. Aneke?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, Aneke, we hear you. Thank you.
Ah, great. Thank you. So I'm going to spend about a little less than 25 minutes just going through some brief background. Feel free to put questions in the chat box. So the idea is that this is a webinar, but the content that will be shared between SALC and all the other partners on this webinar will be made available to every participant. And when we send that to you, we will also send you a questionnaire. If you complete that questionnaire, then you will get a certificate, so that this can then count as both a webinar and a training session. So to start off with, I think why it's very important to look at hate and how we deal with hate is because hate is just the start of things going downhill. And we know there's hate expressed against many different groups in our society, whether it's people with disabilities, people who are queer, people who are women, people who are refugees or asylum seekers or migrants. So hate is very prevalent in our society, but we've sort of allowed it to continue festering. And we're now in a situation where it's escalated worldwide, and we have to think really about how we focus on getting rid of it. Now, I want to just share a quote of Nelson Mandela, that we're not born to hate each other. You're not, when you come into this world, you're not a hateful person. So when we think about hate, even though I'm going to speak only about the legal issues, when we get to the discussion at the end of the webinar, I think it's also important to reflect on other ways in which we can deal with hate. And I know from living in South Africa that although we are a very hateful society, many forms of hate have sort of been addressed just by people listening to each other and by people trying to understand misunderstandings. And I think a big part of hate is the fact that we are ignorant. We are ignorant about other people's lives and other people's experiences. And we are very perceptive to misinformation about other people. So a big part of dealing with hate is also to bring forward all our experiences, to make people know that the people they are hateful against are human beings just like they are, and that there's actually no reason. We don't want to have a society in which children grow up thinking that hate is okay. That's not the society I think that anyone wants. But it is about having those very difficult conversations, and conversations one can only really have on the ground, face to face with people. But let's speak today a bit about the legal issues. The UN has a lot of ideas about how one can deal with hate online and offline, and I'll share their guidelines in the chat box in a bit. So when we speak about hate speech specifically, many people say that freedom of speech include the right to express hate. And that's actually not correct. It's in two very different things. And we'll speak a bit today about the difference between hate speech and freedom of speech. And this is important, and I'll get to you a bit later on why it's so important. People say it's very hard to distinguish between the right to free speech and the right to hate speech. And sometimes legally this is true when hate speech in some countries is limited to only speech that incites violence, and that any other sort of speech would then constitute free speech or form part of your freedom of expression. But it's not entirely accurate. And I think as activists and people who want to stop hate, we have to stop speech that is hateful, even if it might not be speech that can result necessarily in a criminal offense or something. Any speech that is hateful, and if those speeches is amplified over and over until it becomes hate speech and targeting of specific groups, we have to stop it right in the beginning. So if we look at hate speech itself, there's no specific universal definition for hate speech. Under international human rights law, hate speech generally refers to an incitement to discrimination, hostility, or violence. If you look at the UN itself, they define it a bit more broadly as any kind of communication that attacks or uses pejorative or discriminatory language with reference to a person or a group of on the basis of who they are, whether it's their religion, ethnicity, nationality, race, color, descent, gender, or other identity factor. When we get to, and I just want you to note the point about gender or other identity factor. In some countries, our laws on hate speech is a bit more narrower, and it doesn't include gender or other identity factor. And that is hugely problematic because it doesn't actually foresee the range of basis on which hate speech happens against groups of people. So when we talk about hate speech, we talk about speech that's targeted at individuals or groups of individuals. So we're not talking about speech that's targeted against the state or people, officers in the state, or public officials. So, and hate speech is sort of roughly, there's three parts to it. The one is how the hate speech is conveyed. And it's basically any form of expression, whether it's images, cartoons, gestures, a swastika. It could be any type of thing that's generally seen as constituting hate speech. And normally it is discriminatory, and it's based on the identity of people. And it really, as I said, includes so many different types of identity that can form part of hate speech. Now, every country has slightly different provisions in their constitution, but you know that the constitution is the supreme law of the country. So in Eswatini, there's both a right to freedom of conscience and a right to freedom of expression. So if you look at the right to freedom of conscience, it says that everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, or religion. So just to say that at the bottom, if it says constitution, that's the law where this section comes from, and it's quoted directly. And if you see like the number at top in the left-hand corner, like here it says 23, that's the section in the law. So if you ever had to go look up for it, then you know we're speaking about section 23. So section 23 speaks to freedom of conscience. But so you have the right to think anything you want, right? But there's limitations to how you express that right. And the Constitution limits that right on the basis of public safety or public order, and it's or on the basis of protecting the rights of others. So if you see at the bottom that paragraph B, that's the important one. So you have the right to freedom of conscience, but you can't exercise it to the extent that it affects the rights of other people. So I'm going to go to the right to freedom of speech. That is section 24 of the Constitution. And it again says you have the right to freedom of expression. Now, I know this right is controversial in Eswatini because not everyone is able to express their ideas as easily for fear of repression. But what we're going to focus on in this discussion is on those people who say that that freedom of expression allows expressing hate. And for people who say that, our response is that no, if you look at the Constitution, which gives you the right to freedom of expression, it gives you that right to freedom of expression, but it limits that right in section 24(3), and it limits it in the interest of public safety or public order, and also it limits it to protect the reputation and rights of other individuals. So actually, it then means the Constitution prohibits hate speech, because hate speech would constitute speech which impact on public safety and speech which impact on the rights and reputation of other people. So theoretically, if you look just at these two sections, the Constitution of Eswatini says that hate speech is not included within the right to freedom of speech. So I'm going to move on. It's not explicit, but that's it's very clear from the wording itself, even though it doesn't mention hate itself. So if your rights have been violated, obviously people can go to the courts to deal with that. Now, the reason why I wanted to show you that rights can be limited is because sometimes people say you can never limit any rights. So often media companies are against laws that would deal with hate speech. Or religious people are against laws that would deal with hate speech because they think that they feel that sometimes it's too much regulation on speech, and it interferes with their right to express their opinions. And we'll speak a bit about that, but that is not actually the case, because what those sort of arguments do is it normalizes hate speech. So now all of us almost think, yeah, it feels like hate speech to me, but they have the right to say what they think. And so as we normalize it, and as we put the right to freedom of expression over the prohibition against hate speech, we say it's okay. And the more we say it's okay to commit hate speech against any group, no matter what group, then it will affect all groups. So if you're, for example, a queer activist and you see an act of xenophobia where people commit hate speech against another group just based on their ethnicity or their origin, we have to speak out about it, because any form of hate speech, if we tolerate it, it normalizes all forms of hate speech. So there are a few things in the law that can help to deter people who engage in hateful crimes or in hate speech. And I'm just going to go through a few of them very quickly. So there is what you call civil defamation. So civil defamation is when you go to the court to sue someone for damages. And when you go to court, you can also stop them from continuing their hate speech by getting an interdict. The problem with a civil defamation case is you have to get a lawyer and you have to go to the High Court. And sometimes if you then ask the court for damages, the amount that you will get in damages would probably be less than what you will end up paying your lawyer. Now, sometimes the courts would say that, okay, if you won the case, then the other party has to pay your legal costs as well. But sometimes there could be, you might lose the case because it's very difficult sometimes to prove that a person have been defamed. It's not impossible, and I think it's important to show that you have been defamed. And that's basically if someone harmed your reputation or dignity. Now, an act of defamation means that if someone must succeed in court in a claim for damages, they have to show that the statement that was made was a public statement, that the person intended to defame you, and that there's a harm or injury, and it doesn't have to be a physical harm, and that it violated your reputation and dignity. So sometimes there would be a higher award if you can actually show that the statement the person's made is targeted towards a bigger community, which would constitute really hate speech, and it's affecting the lives of a number of people. And if the court then does award damages, that would be a way of deterring that person and other people like that person from just saying hateful things without thinking about the consequences of their actions. And people can seldom, there's not really a defense to hate speech if you get sued for that. So there's other crimes, and these crimes are in various parts of Eswatini's laws. So under the Public Order Act, for example, it's an offense to intimidate someone. So if you feel that what someone had said constitutes intimidation against a particular group, you could go to the police to lay a charge of intimidation. And then there's the Computer Crime and Cybercrimes Act, and this is really the most useful one for things that happen online. So Eswatini has an offense called cyberbullying. If you're sending messages in an intimidating or threatening manner, and this is really any type of online communication, whether it's through email or on the internet or through social media. And it's, yeah, I think, yeah, one would again go to the police and say, this is what's happening. Now, in the same way, there's also crime of cyber stalking. And you'll see under the definition of cyber stalking, it includes threatening, defamation, false accusations, yeah, and just trying to embarrass or harass a person. Then there's also, and not many countries have that, in the Cybercrime Act, there's a offense against producing, making available or distributing racist, xenophobic, or hate speech material. And this is a very, very useful offense to take note of. Now, they define what such material is by saying racist, xenophobic, and hate speech means any material which advocates, promotes, or incites hatred, discrimination, or violence against any individual or group of individuals, which may be based on race, color, descent, national or ethnic origin, religion, creed, or social or economic standing, political opinion, or disability. You see here how I mentioned earlier in the UN definition, the difference here, they don't have gender. They also don't have, well, we didn't expect them to have sexual orientation and gender identity, but they don't even have gender. So you'd have to argue that it falls under social standing. or that it should be read to be inclusive of that. Or one could actually ask that the law be amended to include additional basis. I mean, it also doesn't include health status, which is in the UN example, for example. So it's a very limited problematic section, but one can use it as much as you can. And you definitely want to use it to go after some acts of hate so that you can start creating the debate in society about how hate should not be tolerated. So there's also an offense of genocide and crimes against humanity in the Constitution. This would be a much harder one to prove, but I think easier for online communications because people do say a lot of stuff online and express themselves even on things that happen outside of the country. And again, we need to, every time we see hate online, we need to call it out and say that that is a crime. So lastly, in the Cybercrime Act, there's also the offense of harassment. So if you use electronic communication with the intention to coerce, intimidate, insult, harass, or cause emotional distress to a person, or to support hostile behavior. So this hate speech would easily fall within this offense as well. So you can see there's a number of ways in which one can lay a charge against someone who is engaging in hate speech or speech that is very close to hate speech or might lead to that. Just on some other laws that might be useful, the Eswatini Broadcasting Act says that any broadcaster may not have programs that offense against or that incites crime or leads to disorder, or that is broadcast in bad faith. And then just quickly as another point, there are in the common law in Eswatini certain crimes. Now, sometimes crimes are committed out of hate. And then people would be charged with murder, rape, assault, or grievous bodily harm. And you would know of many such instances where that has happened. Now, in those situations, normally what you want to have is that people who commit those crimes receive a more aggravated sentence. Now, aggravated sentence would be where the court takes into consideration that the crime was committed as part of hatred towards a group, and therefore that the crime is taken more seriously. So I'm just saying that now this examples would be hate crimes targeted against people based on their sexual orientation or disability, or signs of crimes committed that signs shows hostility towards victims or is motivated by hostility. So just to get back quickly, that in my initial conversation, I said that sometimes it should be about starting conversations. So it is possible for the court to not convict a person if it's not a very serious form of the crime, but to reprimand the person. And that in itself can be very useful to start conversations with people, with that person and people in their group, to start saying why there shouldn't be hatred. Another important one, which could be quite a good deterrent, is that the court can, as part of sentencing, a court can order that the person pays compensation. And one can just look at this and doesn't necessarily need to. I think what one eventually want to work towards is that that compensation isn't necessarily just against the individual. So in South Africa, for example, one of our politicians, Julius Malema, was accused of hate speech. And the court ordered, in addition to apology, that he must pay money towards a shelter that dealt with victims of such hate. So, like there's many different ways in which the courts can show society that hate speech and hate crimes are not to be tolerated. And then there's one which I don't know if they use it, but this could be very interesting. If a person is conducting themselves in a way that is violent within society, they can be brought before a magistrate, not as a criminal case, but really for the magistrate to warn them and say, stop doing this or you're going to end up in prison. Now, I doubt this has ever been used in a hate speech type of situation, but just to say this, we need to keep whatever tools we can in our pocket in case we need it for future use. So to get back to the point in all of this is we need to show that we're not tolerating intolerance. Because if we say nothing, it means we're tolerating it. And that means it will continue in our society. And I think what we really want is we want the courts to show that they are taking hate speech and hate crimes seriously. And we need to train the magistrates and the police and the judges on why they must take it seriously, on why any act of hate, whether it's hate speech or hate crimes or any other act of hate, it makes society more unsafe for everyone. And we cannot have a society in which that is the case. And the courts need to find ways in which to deter people from engaging in hate crimes and hate speech. And there's some ways in which that can be done. In some countries, they have specific laws around hate crimes, or the sentencing guidelines or laws say that you get a more severe sentence in the case that the crime was committed with the element of hatred or discrimination. And judges also need to be made aware that they need to take hatred and hate crimes into consideration when they think of the sentencing they give a perpetrator. And then one more thing to say is that we're having this discussion today in a broader context. And I mentioned this in the beginning, that internationally, especially in the US, the right wing are claiming that they can say whatever they want on the basis of freedom of speech. And if anyone tries to stop them, they say that they are being victimized because they're not allowed to say whatever they want. And we need to push back against that, because we cannot allow that argument to come into our own countries in the region, because, I mean, that would be terrible. So we need to be very mindful of people who create those arguments about hate speech is included in the right to freedom of expression and you can say whatever you want. And we've seen how badly it's gone in the US now, and how some rights protections that there were have been turned back, even against women. And protections that have been there for years that have now been rolled back because of the increase in hatred and hate speech. And there's just one potentially interesting example where a woman in the UK was last week sentenced to imprisonment. And she wrote a tweet on social media where it was shortly after an immigrant had killed a child in the UK. And she then responded by saying, this is horrible. We need to burn down all the hotels and buildings in which immigrants and refugees are staying. And the court then convicted her under the Public Order Act of incitement to violence. And immediately after the conviction, a lot of people came out saying, yes, but it violates her freedom of expression. And it's a disproportionate response to imprison someone for what they did. And sometimes that argument might be sufficient, but in her case, the Court of Appeal said that no, there's a clear, if you look at her social media, she was consistently targeting people. And she knew exactly what she was doing, and she knew she was inciting violence. So therefore, there can be no excuse for what she did, and she was then sentenced to imprisonment. Just very lastly then, now you see in Eswatini is a good case example of how the laws have started to deal with hate speech in a very clear way. There can be some fixes here and there, but we haven't even used the laws that are there at the moment. But in terms of the African Commission, they have suggested that there should be a specific prohibition against any sort of incitement to discrimination, hostility, or violence. And sometimes there would be a need for criminal sanctions, depending on the sort of situation and the type of hate speech that is being perpetrated. And to end off, I think that sometimes we fall into the trap of saying there's a thin line between hate speech and freedom of expression. And by doing that, we create an opening for more hate speech. And what we should actually say is we support hate speech. Oh, no, we support free speech. We condemn hate speech. And we find no difficulty in making that distinction, because no one has the right to exercise hate speech. And I'll leave it at that. And I just want to check if there's any questions in the chat box. You feel free to add any if you want to. And then if there are any experiences people want to share, or should I rather hand over, Brad?
Yeah, just to say, I had a quick whiplash moment when you said we should support hate.
Sorry.
Not supporting hate. I
No.
think it's like, thank you so much for your presentation, Annika. I think that's very useful, especially now that a lot of us have access to social media, our keypads, and all, and there's this wave of trending and saying whatever you want to say or can say without thinking of the consequences, the impact, and it's true what you said. It's important for us to identify hate, to know what hate is, and we shouldn't tolerate it. We should be able to recognize it and report it. Yeah. So thank you, Anik. If there just a reminder, folks can pose their questions, comments in the chat box here on Zoom and on Facebook as well. Those that are watching from our Facebook live stream, you can also pose questions, comments on the comment box. Yeah, and just to hear what communities are doing, what NGOs are doing in Eswatini to address hate, what the experiences have been. I'll hand over to ESGM to just help lead with that discussion. Yeah. Banele Sam. I think in the meantime also, please also just, if you want to, you can also introduce yourself in the comment box, just your name, your organization, the communities that you work with. Yeah. Okay. I'm not sure if there's technical issues in Eswatini. Do we have Sam, Banele, and Mapezu to help with the next segment? Okay, I think there's a question here. Let me just try and read it quickly. Okay, question from Simanga. Would it be considered hate speech if someone said something about you in your absence, then later told you what they said and also said it in front of your colleagues?
That would be called gossip
That would be
and
called
bad
gossip.
behavior. Yeah, but not hate speech. Hate speech would be if it's a statement made, whether it doesn't matter if it's made in your absence or out of your absence, but if it's a statement made against you or a group of individuals that is discriminatory and that incites discrimination and violence towards you. So it's hate speech better fits if it's against a group of people, but it can be against the individual person as well. But it really depends on what the people said and how they said it. It doesn't really matter about whether you were there or not. Although you'd have to be able to prove it, obviously. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Anake. Do we have our rep from UNDP? If you're here, you can take the floor.
Hi, Bradley. I've got a question, please.
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. I think for me, I just want to know on how best can one deal with hate speech more, especially in bus ranks, because that is where us as trans people we face more hate speech, because even if you want to report the case to the police, but you can't really spot the real person who was talking, because you find that it would be a group of people speaking, even that everyone speaking, saying all those sorts of words. So you are then, can't even tell who to report to the police. How best can one tackle such a situation? Thank you.
You want me to answer that, Brad?
Yes, yes. And then we can also give it to our colleagues at the Human Rights Commission to add on as they come on.
Yes, because I think that's the important question, because you're so right that the majority of hate speech isn't actually a hate speech that's clearly defined with a clear perpetrator. And it happens on a daily basis in public areas, right? The problem with those sort of hate speech, so say, for example, if everyone thinks it's funny to make hateful comments against a particular group, right? And they think it's normal and all those sort of things. That shows one, ignorance, and it shows that as a society we are tolerant towards hate speech. The solution isn't going to be to arrest all of those people, because arresting them, first, there's not really clear offenses under which you would arrest them if it happens in public, short of intimidation. And secondly, it wouldn't necessarily solve your problem, because all it would do is create increased hostility, because now they feel that they just said stuff and they feel that you might be overreacting. You can also not really sue them in court, because it would be difficult to pinpoint one person and what that one person would have said. What you could do is look at this area in which it's happening. If it's happening at taxi ranks which have some sort of informal regulation at those ranks, one might be able to engage with those people and say, listen, is there a way we can think about having campaigns at the taxi ranks where we put up posters against hate speech or educate people or those sort of things? You could think about, how do we educate people on community radio stations and those sort of things. So although this is a terrible answer, it would be really difficult to take it up against sort of a random individual when everyone is engaging in it. So it makes a broader point. And I think what one could do is first engage in advocacy around the issue, and then in that advocacy, give people a number where they can report instances. And that in itself might either deter people, or it might start giving you very clear situations where it happened, where there's a name involved. And then one can try and go after those individuals. So it's also about public education and telling people hate is not okay. Put a huge billboard up at the taxi rank if you need to. And create the public conversation on why it's not okay, and go on radio and TV and newspapers on why it's not okay. Use personal examples and human impact stories. And then after that, one can then start thinking about how do you hold individual perpetrators liable for those sort of things. And it would be good to sort of also meet up with other groups who engage in similar acts. Like if there's often certain persons with disabilities who there's hate speech against or whatever, then you can also form partnerships with those sort of groups so that one actually have different type of examples of hate speech and why it's not okay. And to say, listen, you can have your opinion, but don't spread hate in our spaces, and we don't want that, and we're not saying okay to that. So the law doesn't really, what the law does is the law says the right to freedom of expression does not extend to hate speech. And you use that in your advocacy on why you're advocating against hate speech, basically, until you find very clear scenarios where you can actually take people to court.
Yeah. Thank you, Annika. Just checking, is our colleague from the Human Rights Commission here?
Good day, brilliant colleagues. This is Pagamashili here from the Human Rights Commission.
Good day. How are you? Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, yes. In the room, I'm with Nelsie Eswatini and Bendulo Masuku from UNDP.
Oh, perfect. Everyone is together there. Makes it easier. I think, yeah. So over to you, really. I think we've heard examples on how do we address hate. We've had some scenarios on how we can tackle that. So I think just hearing from UNDP, from the Human Rights Commission, on the work that you do, how can communities engage with you, report cases, and really just say no to hate. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Bradley. I will start from the Commission's perspective. From our end, as you would know, that we are a national human rights institution with a broad mandate to promote and protect human rights of all people in the country, regardless of whatever categorization. So we exist to do, among other things, facilitate complaints handling, which means that our office receives complaints from individuals who allege a violation of human rights. So in this instance, it could be that an individual who has been subjected to hate speech. It can also be a group of people who are affected by a certain hate speech, or there can also be someone who has heard or who knows about the violation, that the violation has taken place. And therefore, we receive complaints from those broad categories. Also, we have a mandate to promote the human rights, including ensuring that there is no violations that happen amongst specified groups or individuals. So in this instance, I think from our end, we have in the past, received a complaint from a group that alleged that there were, certain utterances that were made during a traditional ceremony, a national traditional event, were targeted towards them. So as you know that we are a traditional society, at times there are traditional songs that are sung which may be directed, indirectly, passing certain messages which may be offending to certain groups. So we received from this particular group that that particular song, sort of perpetuated hate or against them. So it's a very fresh matter. We are still in the process of investigating that matter, but we are seeing that now probably people are becoming aware that a freedom of expression cannot just be used as a blanket to even attack certain individuals or specific groups. So we're working on that matter, and with the knowledge that we've received through this engagement, we're hoping that we're going to be able to make sort of an informed conclusion on the assessment of whether that song is offending or not. But also we, in our space now, working with sexual minorities as well, we unfortunately we don't have any case on record. But of course, since our mandate allows us to deal with these specific complaints, we are hoping that as a result of this engagement, now we will start receiving complaints from specific individuals or sexual minority groups who receive or who are at the receiving end of this hate speech. But then lastly, before I conclude, I'd like to also note that from the presentation of Anneke, that in most of these offenses in our country are covered by the criminal our criminal code, and most people, you may find that they may resort to use the criminal justice as opposed to approaching the commission. Yeah, so I think probably for us, we'll pretend to see how best we can complement the criminal justice to ensure that people are able to get redress at the end of the day, because we want to send a clear message that hate speech is not freedom of expression. So I think from this end, can I end here for now? And I will try to respond to the question that's up there on the chat box.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes. Can I respond to the question, Bradley, on how people
Yes,
can submit
yes. Yes. So the
anonymous
question
complaints?
is, how can individuals in Eswatini submit complaints to the Human Rights Commission, and can these be anonymous?
Thank you. I think that's a very, very good question. Yes, complaints in the commission are submitted in various ways, one of which is physically coming into the commission's offices to lodge a complaint. Secondly, you can send an email or an inbox in our Facebook page. You can also send someone to submit on your behalf. For the commission, it doesn't matter whether you have come physically or not. The nature of our proceedings ensures secrecy, protection of the reporter, unless of course the investigation would require that the name or that person be identified. We have mechanisms to ensure anonymous reporting, and we would like to guarantee those who may wish to file a report that even if in their report they indicate that they want to be treated, anonymously, we would ensure that we have those steps in place to ensure that people's identities are protected, not to put them at risk. So yes, we can submit. We can share our details as well in the chat box, if that's okay.
Oh yes, yes, please. I think you can share it, and then we'll also do a follow-up after the webinar, compile all the resources, presentations, and then share it with everyone. Yeah. Thank you. Over to UNDP.
Okay, thank you very much, Bradley, and greetings to colleagues. And thank you to Anneke for the wonderful, insightful presentation. I think it was really eye-opening. I think even for myself in Eswatini, some of the things that she pulled up, I was probably not aware of some. And I think it was really important. And I think from UNDP side, I think recently over the past year or so, we've been implementing and we're continuing to implement a project. It's a regional project which focuses on, enhancing the capacities of Yankee populations. And Yankee populations, we include LGBTIQ and also include key populations as they are defined by our National Strategic Framework for HIV and AIDS. And I think one of the key and core outcomes is around issues of capacity building for the popular community members themselves, the key populations themselves or the LGBTI persons themselves, for them to know their rights, for them to be able to advocate and speak, and also be able to engage at different platforms at different levels, whether it's on a legislative issue, whether it's on a policy issue. They should have the capacities that are necessary for them to engage, not for us as UN to speak on their behalf, but for us to capacitate them so that it's them who are speaking their issues for themselves. So this is one of the projects that we've been implementing and we're continuing to implement. We're working alongside with a majority of the CSOs in country. And I think, with ESGM also on board and others, including Health Plus for Men and many others. And I think for this particular topic, I do feel, that we do need to have these engagements and these kind of eye-opening sessions, particularly in our, context, because I do feel and I do believe that there's a lot probably that has gone unreported, because people maybe didn't know or, they were not aware of these structures that are there, or maybe even of the legal provisions, the protections, even their constitution. To some extent, people still do not really fully appreciate in terms of the key provisions and the protections that are provided by the constitution. And also, I mean, the issue of taking things via the legal justice route, I mean, it's very tedious processes. So probably you find that a lot of it needs lawyers and so on. So most of it, you find that, a lot of our community people probably would stay shy away from lawyers. But I think the most important part for me, I think, is the education, is the importance in terms of educating them, making sure that, we are aware of our rights, we are aware of what needs to happen, what need not have to happen, so that we are able to speak up and speak against, and also to encourage the reporting, so that we can even to some extent test our, judicial systems in terms of the adherence to the law, and in terms of jurisprudence and all of those things. So I think really this is an important session that we've had, and I do believe that probably, from here, I want to believe that probably we can have more in country, probably with some face-to-face with some of the community members, because I think this is very important for it not to end here. Otherwise, thank you very much for the opportunity, Bradley.
Thank you. I mean, indeed, the conversations need to continue and must continue, and through on different platforms also. There's a quick question that just came through from Sandisile. I have a question. I don't know if this passed me, but I want to ask what is it that I can do in a case where I'm being victimized through hate speech, besides going to court or the police, like as an act of self-defense? Is there something that I can do, really, without me retaliating with the same discriminatory act or doing worse? Or do I just shut it shut it up until I reach the officials and state my case, knowing that the legal way can drag for some time and is also costly?
If I can just come in there, Bradley, I think this is a perfect example where it would be better to go to the Human Rights Commission, because you are right that the legal processes can be quite intimidating. Another thing, and this is what you can ask the Human Rights Commission to also assist you with, or any other lawyer, but is to write a cease and desist letter. So it's basically a one sentence letter: dear whoever, it's come to our attention that you've been engaging in acts which are contrary to our law and constitution. Should you continue, we will proceed with the various legal options available to us. Something like that often helps scare people and just get them to stop. You could also try and get the interdict at court, but again, which is supposed to be quicker. But I would suggest going to the Human Rights Commission and asking them to write you some sort of letter.
At no cost. Yes. We have Model C from Transwati, right? Over to you, and just sharing with us what the situation is, experiences, and how Transwati is also dealing with hate. And, yeah.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Am I audible enough?
Yes, yes, you are.
Oh, thank you so much. For trans people in Eswatini, have faced a lot of consequences in regards to hate speech. So some of the issues run as follows. Mostly is the issue of gender-based violence, where it happens at a taxi rank, whereby as a trans person you've got no control over of how people talk, and you can't even report them to the police because you are not even sure who was the one who was speaking, because like everyone was just speaking to you, saying all sorts of words. And also the issue of stigma and discrimination. This also comes from the families which we are coming from, whereby if these people are had that stigma, so it becomes very difficult for these family members to accept them the way they are. So you find that most of these trans people are being expelled from their homes, and then they go out there, to their friends, and a lot that is happening there. Some of them get to engage in sex work, conducting HIV and other sexually transmitted diseases. Also, social exclusion. Most of us were unable to attend to some of social events, some of the cultural events, which includes the Inkwala, or maybe King's birthday, just to name a few. So we also had some experience last month on the King's birthday, where me and my gay friends attended the King's birthday. So these two of my gay friends were just chased away. They said they should go out and wear the job, of which my case was different though, because they asked me, "Are you a male or female?" I said, "I'm a woman." I say, "We don't understand that I'm a trans." And then they said, "Step aside." And then they call one of the officials there to speak to me, and we had a lengthy discussion with him. So after that, he said I should continue getting inside the King's birthday ceremony, of which then I see a gap in terms of sensitizing. I don't know how to put it. Maybe who is it? These traditional leaders or something, but it has to start there from the traditional leaders in our societies. Also, high suicidal rates. Earlier on, I spoke about trans people who have been expelled from their homes. Most of the trans people, when they're being expelled from their homes, some of them, they commit suicide because they lack that, their families, relatives, because when they're out there, there's a lot that coming into play. So a lot of suicidal rates in Eswatini. Also, lack of legal protection. Some lawyers feel embarrassed to represent us in court because we know that Eswatini is a patriarchal country, and also it becomes difficult for them to represent us. It only takes those lawyers who are human rights lawyers and those who are not afraid of anything. Yeah, and also the trans people, we are unable to attend to clinical services or health services because of the stigma which is associated with us as trans people receiving treatment at public facilities, because the ID that I'm producing and the person sitting in front of the nurse is contrary from what these people are saying. And then you find that most of the questions they ask to us, it becomes so much disturbing for that trans person. So most of them tend not to go to clinical services because of that regard. And also the tools that are being used in the country. And when these people are exercising hate speech towards us, it becomes very difficult for them, especially the policy makers, to advocate for the amendment of these policies. Because if these policies are amended, very well then, we could have tools in clinics which are accommodative of trans people, and also in such a way that it also erases the trans visibility. Because if me as a trans woman, as model, say, attend to a clinic, I will be recorded under the male the male bracket. Why? Because I'm trans. But if the tools are so much accommodative towards trans people, then as a country, we are going to have the data for trans people. So hate speech plays a huge role, in our lives as trans people, because if these people are, doesn't use hate speech towards us, then it will be easier for them to advocate for our rights. I think I will end here for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Model C. And you're right, there still is a lot of work that needs to be done, especially around sensitization on LGBTIQ issues and so forth. Yes, Anneke.
Thanks, Bradley. I think that was very good explanation of many of the challenges people face. And I think what you raise is a very important point about hate speech within health facilities. And I do think it's important for us to document it. And there would be various ways in which one can act on it, either directly at the health facility or with the professional bodies that health workers belong to. Or even at the Human Rights Commission level. So I do think it's important. It's actually very important to set it out. If it's happening persistently at a specific facility where people are treating people systemically in a discriminatory way, it might not lead entirely to constitute hate speech, but it might very much be very close to it. And either way, it's unacceptable. So I think that would be very important to raise. I've also just put in the chat box some other offenses in the Sexual Offences and Domestic Violence Act, unlawful stalking and sexual harassment, which you could use for the examples that you have utilized, especially examples in public spaces where it actually constitutes sexual harassment. And those are criminal offenses that one could lay criminal charges. Yeah, and the thing with the Sexual Offences and Domestic Violence Act is that the police have to take any complaints made in terms of that act seriously, and they have to prioritize it. And if they don't, there's ways in which one can act on it. So if you go to the police and you say, I want to lay a charge of sexual harassment against this taxi driver who was the one who encouraged everyone else to harass me, and he does it every time I go to the taxi rank, you are entitled to that. And if they don't take that case seriously, there would be ways in which one can act on that. And then just in terms of finding a suitable lawyer, the best would probably be to contact SALK, and then we can refer you.
Thanks, Anneke. So a quick question, Anneke, also, just a quick follow-up on what you said. Is it advisable to go to the Human Rights Commission first, or to the police, document it, then go to the Human Rights Commission, or it doesn't really matter?
I think you want to do both. I think wherever you go to, go with people that you can support you. Don't go on your own, because then it's harder. Go with Transwati or ESGM if you can. Go to the police station or to the Human Rights Commission. Just also because sometimes you don't want to follow up, but they can follow up on your behalf.
Yeah.
And I think do both. because if you're trying to get the police to act something, but at the same time the Human Rights Commission is also investigating it, it just creates more power and more support for countering hate.
Thank you. Just looking at some comments also. So there's a comment on that we got from Facebook. Where is it? Okay. Sandisida says, I wish we can have this conversation again physically, maybe. This is informative also, as we as Eswatini citizens do need to be capacitated on such issues. Ooh. Capacitated on such, because we entertain all types of discrimination in the name of what can we really do, and this is because of the society on its own. Before we get to spreading awareness on such, we need to be able to identify things that we should not entertain without fear or favor of the society we grew up or growing up in. Yeah. There's a question. How can we effectively protect male sex workers from hate crime in environments where stigma, discrimination, and criminalization prevent them from disclosing their occupation or reporting abuse? Yeah. I think Annika also gave some pretty good examples also on how we can report hate cases. So inboxing the commission, we can inbox them, reaching out to our CSOs, ESGM, Transwati, Voice of VOOF, sorry, yeah. And then also going to the police, so having as much support as you can to report these hate crimes. Yeah. Right. I'm not sure if there are more comments, questions. Anyone would like to say something from convening here? Do we have our representative from Voice of Our Voices here also? Just checking. Okay, I guess not. I don't know. Do we have any comments on Facebook, Teddy?
Hi, Bradley. No, Facebook is quite chilled. There's no comment so far.
Okay. There's a question from someone. Hi, Bradley. I'd like to know from the participants in the meeting, how can the media play a role in supporting the affected communities, and how would they love for the issues to be reported? Yeah. How can the media play a role in supporting the affected communities, and how would we like our issues to be reported in the media? I think one thing also is to also just engage with if it's Transwati, if it's ESGM, just around how can we effectively report on LGBTIQ issues, on hate issues, and in a very sensitive tone that is still respectful to the communities. There has been a few resources that have been produced in Eswatini with regards to media reporting. I think we will share those also. But I think it's important to also just ensure that communities are protected when it comes to reporting on LGBTIQ issues. Yeah. All right. I do not see any more questions, comments. Anike.
Sorry for talking a lot. I note the comment that was made about by San Cecilia about how we should think about meetings in Eswatini and go through this. I think that obviously this is like you're just seeing it for the first time. But once you read things over and over and you really become comfortable in it, then it would be possible for a group of activists to go to a local police station, meet the head of the police station and say, can we have a discussion on the types of abuses we're facing in the community? Even and how can we address some of those? And we've worked with communities where sex workers have very successfully done those sort of meetings with the police, or where people go to the Human Rights Commission and just talk about specific areas and asking advice about how could they perhaps deal with those areas, or even working with the Human Rights Commission to think about training more broadly on rights and how one can do that where we all come together to actually, I mean, there's not a lot of resources out there, but we do need to speak more out against hate. And we can think about how we all do that together. In a way, yeah, so it's not, we should just figure out ways in which we collaborate. And I think obviously anyone's welcome to call us or the Human Rights Commission or anyone else and say, I've got this need, and then one can figure out how to support that as well.
Thank you. I think in the absence of questions, comments, I can hand it over to the Commission and UNDP and Transwati. If there's any last words, any last comments from you before we end this webinar.
Hi, Bradley. Well, hi, colleagues. Also, I think maybe from the question which have been posed earlier on about the role media houses can play in reducing hate speech from the communities. From the communities, I think the media houses should publish true stories which have been submitted, because what we've seen earlier on is that when one asks for your story, yes, you write that story and ask for a picture which they want you to publish, but upon receiving that story, but the story have changed and they've put in pictures which we haven't agreed upon. So I think the media houses should also help us to publish true stories from the community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Model C. I think, yeah.
This time around, but about it.
Yes. Yes. I think what Model C has said is media houses need to accurately report on our stories. I think what we'll do also after this webinar, as we share our presentations, resources also that have been shared in the chat, is also share a media guide that was produced for reporters on how to accurately report on LGBTIQ stories. All right. Commissioners,
Yeah.
UNDP?
You.
Thank you, Bradley, for the opportunity. I am Nelly from the Commission on Human Rights. For us, I think we just have the session. It has been very insightful and eye-opening. We have noted the abuses that the community experience on their daily basis. And as a commission, we just want to appreciate even UNDP for the session, for making the platforms available for the group and us as the commission to work together. We just want we are just hoping they will strengthen the support given, and also we hope SALC as well will strengthen our capacity as a commission, because these issues are evolving. And I think of note and of particular importance is the issue of awareness raising and advocacy, because like we said, there's a lot that is happening out there, and probably people are not even aware that they're breaking the laws. Like my boss, Mr. Shili, alluded to it earlier on, that these are criminal offenses, but people do it every day, and they just are off the hook. They're not arrested, they're not brought to book for doing such crimes. So I think we need to raise awareness a lot on these hate crimes and the abuses and harassment that these particular groups are experiencing. And we are hoping that as June is approaching, which is the Pride Month, there'll be an activity with the support of UNDP that we will do together with the groups, and probably we will have sessions before that, so that we're able to know more about the abuses and hate speech or hate crimes that these groups are facing, so that we're able to address it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nelly. All right, I think we have come to the end of our webinar. And please, if you do want more to get in touch with us, you can always reach us on social media at the Southern African Litigation Center, or reach out to ESGM or Transwati or the Human Rights Commission. The contacts are in the chat, and we will make them available to everyone also, especially those who are watching on Facebook as well. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, and have a good afternoon, almost evening. Bye, everyone.